Why is being who you really are one of the most difficult, but also one of the most fulfilling things that you can do? Hello and welcome back to the Spiritual Freedom Show with Richard Lawrence. My name is Darren Ball, and this is the podcast helping you to awaken your chakras, unlock your psychic powers, and discover true spirituality. Now, in this episode, we're going to explore the challenges of spiritual self-discovery and what it really means to live with authenticity. We're going to discover how to transform fear, doubt, disbelief, social pressure, the pressure to conform into a life that's aligned with your unique spiritual destiny. We're going to discover what happens when you connect more deeply with your own higher self. And we're going to discover actionable tools and affirmations that you can use to manifest your true divine nature. If you haven't subscribed yet, be sure to hit that bell so you don't miss any future episodes with Rich and myself that can help you to discover true spirituality in your life.
Richard.
Darren.
So one of the things I was reflecting on recently is that strangely one of the most difficult things to do is to actually be yourself. And there are all sorts of reasons, of course, some of which I'd like to get into today, but it's fear, maybe pressure to conform. We've talked about soul repression a little bit in this show, perhaps that's a part of it. But I wanted to talk to you today about what people can do if they want to be more at peace with themselves and find fulfillment. And certainly this being yourself seems to be a big part of this. So I think there's a few kind of themes that we could explore here. But it seems that one of these is really understanding what we are in terms of our divine essence, and beginning with that. Do you want to talk a little bit about what we are and returning back to that, what role that plays in being who we are?
Sure. What I would say is, first of all, we have a lower self and a higher self.
Okay.
The question is not just what we are, but what we are meant to be.
Yeah, that's nice. Okay.
And so we have to, for that, try to tune into, well, not try, we can succeed in tuning into our higher self. We can draw on to become what we are meant to be. So it isn't just a question of, well, look, here I am, I'm an aggressive person, I want to go and punch people, so therefore I'm going to be that, and I'll be true to myself. You see what I mean? Yeah. That's an extreme example. Yeah. It's a question of kind of knowing one's aggression, knowing the feelings one has, not being in denial, fully accepting them, but also knowing one is capable of being something much greater than that. And there's some wonderful stories. I mean, there are people who've perhaps been in prison and they've undergone a great change and they've helped many other prisoners and they've realized perhaps the error of their ways and change. There's this thing that a leopard never changes spots. I did some research into that and I found actually a leopard can change its spots.
You heard it here.
Yeah. So that's not true. So it's there are a lot of these sayings that people come up with. Like there's another one: "There's no smoke without any fire." There can be in the world, but we can change. So it's a balance again between knowing what we are. We've got to know what we are. We've got to know what we feel. We've got to not be in denial about that, or not pretend. We might not want to tell other people. We might not want to trust other people fully. Their motives might not be right, and they might use the information in a wrong way. So I'm not saying you've got to go around and tell everybody everything. No, but you yourself, you've got to know what you are, but you've also got to aspire to becoming what you can be, what the master theorist calls your own becoming, in one transmission given through Dr. George King. And everyone can do that. And the way to do that is to tap into one's higher self.
No, that's a beautifully inspiring message. I hadn't even really thought about it in that way, but immediately implies that, yes, we do all have this higher self. There is this greater aspect. We can all transmute these lower aspects of ourselves, these different qualities that may make us, fearful, aggressive, greedy, selfish, whatever. But actually, that's not what we are, and we can embody something that's so much more than that.
Yeah.
Incredibly inspiring, which is what we truly are.
Yeah. There's a saying by the great, I suppose, philosopher, theologian, Erasmus. I think he lived in the 1500s. I might be slightly wrong there, but there's this saying that's often quoted in the land of the blind: "The one-eyed man is king." And it's a clever statement, but it's also telling you on one level, that you have this potential It's all relative. So you can bring out if you've got certain attributes, then you are more capable than those who don't. But there's a much deeper meaning to that, I believe. And I believe Erasmus knew that, which is, of course, the one eye is the third eye. Now, this is something I haven't heard anybody else say. If they have, then great. And I think it was a revelation about mystical things. And in the past, particularly in the West, mystics in general had to keep their beliefs secret because they would be persecuted, they might be killed, there could be trouble if they really spoke out. So it's not always easy to be exactly what you are. I had some contacts from somebody by the name of Jolivet Castello, some psychic contacts. I'd never heard of him. You can look him up. He's a sort of alchemist and chemist from the late 19th, early 20th century. There's a photograph of him on the internet. As I said, I'd never heard of this man. And he spoke sometimes a bit in French, which isn't my, to me, in these messages, a little bit. He was very, very correct and dignified in the way he communicated. But his interest was alchemy. It opened me up to a whole new field. I actually believe he had some contacts with Count Saint-Germain.
Just thinking it.
Yeah, I do believe that. And there was quite a burgeoning. He was also a Rosicrucian. And there was one of his students was the playwright August Strindberg, if people have come across Strindberg. I did music and drama, so I came across him.
Okay.
One of the playwrights from Scandinavia. But who was a Rosicrucian, actually, Strindberg as well. But he was quite a pioneer. But I'm actually a believer that he's one of those who was behind the works of a mystic known as Fulcanelli.
Oh, yeah.
And I've got some of the writings of Fulcanelli. Nobody really knows who wrote it. I actually believe, based on these communications, that Jolivet Castello was involved in that, but they appeared around the time of his lifetime. But that behind it was Count Saint-Germain. But what he did, and it's a long-winded way of saying it, he wrote in what some mystics of the day called the green language, or the language of the birds, were two words and what it means is at one level there's a certain meaning. You can read it in one way.
Yeah.
But if you're able to, there's a whole other level of meaning in it. You find this in all great teaching, as a matter of fact. You find it certainly with the Master Aetherius, and we find it with the 9 freedoms. And this is something that I've realized. You can read something and then you have an experience. And I had some somatic experiences. I read the same thing again and whoa, that's what that means. I've read that 100 times that, I got it at a level, but not at that level. Just to give one example in there, it's bold to see. If you really radiate love, you radiate it through the heart chakra, the throat center, and the Christ center in their fullness. Now, that's an extremely elevated thing, and it's best for people to work on the heart center, actually, and not try and do that. But it's given, though, and it can be done, and it should be done, and I have tried to practice that. Because it contained within a lot of writings are practices, which we don't see as practices. We see them as philosophy, but actually that's something you can do, or it wouldn't be given to you at the right time. And it should be the right time. I'm not recommending everyone goes off and tries to do that straight away. But coming back to Jolivet Castello, I probably pronounced it wrong. This is an example. So he would write a book about, and I've got a couple of his books after having this contact. One is about the archaeology and certain buildings and the meaning of certain images in cathedrals and so on. You can read it as a sort of guidebook, but within it is a lot of revelation and a lot of meaning. I think you will find it in a play called The Alchemist by Ben Jonson, who was a contemporary of Shakespeare. He was actually more highly rated than Shakespeare in his day. And he actually published his plays before he published Shakespeare's plays.
Wow.
Ben Jonson was the sort of power behind that, along with Francis Bacon. Francis Bacon is another one. Sorry, we're doing a little detour here, but I'm just illustrating people who in their day, they couldn't be what they really were. And he was, it's said, the Grand Master of the Rosicrucians. That's Francis Bacon at the time. And of course he was putting stuff into these plays, but in secret, because he thought it would damage his position. Actually, his position got damaged anyway. Interesting. By a set-up bribery and so on, alleged bribery. and he lost his position. And that's when the plays started to be published. But in this play, The Alchemist, though, it's written as a sort of criticism, an attack on alchemists as being con men, virtually, or certain people who claim to be alchemists. And probably that's true in it. But also in it are lots of details which don't need to be given in a comedy about alchemical properties.
So he's like revealing.
Yeah, and he is known to have gone to the court of, I think it's in Prague, of one of the monarchs who was very open to alchemists and so on. So one can look all the while, though. So sometimes in this day and age, you don't need to do that, really. You can come out, you don't shove it down anyone's throat, but for those who are interested, you can reveal your beliefs, and if people don't like it, well, that's their problem. Certainly in some, not in all parts of the world, mind you.
Sure.
But a lot of the time, though, the point I'm really getting to is, though, you've got to know what you are, and you might know things. You might be the one-eyed man in that kingdom. Other people don't know it because they can't see.
Yeah,
it's like the wonderful Plato's cave, and the one. I won't go through the whole parable, but
people know
they know about it. And the one who actually got out, he saw the world, but they thought he was mad in the cave because they hadn't seen it.
Well, I think just come back to Erasmus there, because you mentioned him there, and I think one aspect of him that I think is also a good point to bring out is that he was someone who was, as I understand it, he inspired the Reformation. He was someone who was a very outspoken critic of the church, but at the same time, someone who believed in the unity of the Catholic faith. So he was also very hard to categorize, but he stuck to his guns in terms of what he believed, and he refused to actually join and support the Reformation, from what I understand, reading his history, because what was more important to him was the spiritual unification. And so that there is also a point here about living with integrity in terms of what you believe in.
Yes.
Yeah. And what are your real, values, the deepest held values and beliefs that you have? And is there anything that's going to make you compromise those and sell out, so to speak, while you're going to stick to your guns? He seems to be someone who really did stand by what he believed, in spite of massive pressure, probably from others who were supporters of the Reformation movement to bring that to the fore.
And he lived, I don't know which country he was in. I think he came to England for a while, I believe. I'm no expert on him. I had some contacts with him when I was doing what I call my Kundalini diaries, when I was really starting to get there. I think he was sent to help me because he'd lived in the West, because I think he must have attained a high level, which maybe he didn't speak about much in that life. I'm guessing that. I don't know that. And therefore, because he'd done it in the West, in a sort of active, well, not in a cave, in the East or something, he was sent to help me and give me certain guidance. And he gave me two very, very helpful bits of guidance in my development, both of which should have been obvious to me. One was that you can't just raise the Kundalini to the Christ center. You've got to raise it through all the chakras along the way, which should be obvious. Whereas a lot of visualizations that people teach and that people do are to focus on the third eye.
Yeah.
But actually, if you're actually really going to get, then that's good, because it takes your consciousness higher.
Yeah.
It's a good thing. Those are the two chakras you can focus on: the Christ center, the third eye, and the heart center, safely. And when you do, I say safely, don't ever focus on them in the physical body, by the way. That can be dangerous. But in the aura, in front of you, a few inches in front of you. So that was one thing that he reminded me of. And the other thing he helped me with was that, again, should have been obvious to me, but to raise the Kundalini into the Christ center, and maybe even below that, but certainly the Christ center, you have to enter trance. And I was resisting that, or my mind was resisting it. Didn't want the fear of it, thinking, I'll lose control or what. No, you've got to go, but you're doing it under your own control. So that's when I really got kind of interested in Erasmus. He was basically, somebody asked him to help me, and he really did help me through that.
Wow, it just brings...
Helped me to become a one-eyed man.
Yeah, exactly. His own quote. Yeah.
That's when I realized what that quote meant.
Okay, yeah. It's it's incredible to hear about these experiences and these people who still play a role inspiring, yourself today.
I mean, I don't know, let me quickly say, with all these things, you don't know that Erasmus was his last life, or whether he's had a life in the middle.
Yeah.
I don't know. that can happen, but he came back as Erasmus.
Yeah.
Anyway,
No,
for that
few
purpose.
parts,
Yeah.
Well, I'll just share another one of his quotes, actually, which I think is very relevant to the message today, which is that he says, "It is the cheapest point of happiness that a man is willing to be what he is."
Absolutely. Yeah, and that we have to do. And we have to be what we are. And, if it requires some not exactly subterfuge, hopefully, depending what country you live in and your conditions, as openly as we possibly can. And sometimes you lose out by being what you are. I mean, I've experienced this. I certain radio stations that I do have done would quite like me to be, inverted commas, a space expert, close inverted commas, and
in the conventional sense.
Yeah, talk about the possibility of gaseous environments on planets. But I am not I can study it like anybody can study it, and I understand it. But I said to them, look, this is what I believe. I make sure people know what I do believe. It's not hard nowadays to find out anyway.
Sure.
And sometimes they're less interested then. Sometimes they're more interested. But whatever happens, it's real.
Yeah. I think there's an important message there, because everyone has unique qualities, talent, perspectives to add, and there's an element that you've alluded to here, which is the bravery to be what you are.
Yes.
Goes to the fore.
Yes. And the bravery, and one of the aspects of bravery is also to unlock your psychic powers. It sounds a bit off topic, but we're talking about being what you are. And some people aren't what they are because they don't believe they can be. They don't believe in themselves. They don't believe in their spiritual potential. So they could be an extremely clever person. They could have really good powers of concentration to a limit. But as soon as those powers go towards what I would call the contemplative state, or what, actually more importantly, the 9 freedoms would call the contemplative state, and Dr. George King would call the contemplative state, is when information starts to be feeded back to you. Now, Einstein said words to the effect there is no greater ability of man, these aren't his exact words, than the intuition. So he kind of knew that, and he got some results. I'll mention another person, Sir Isaac Newton.
Oh, yeah.
Who spent more time, I'm told, practicing alchemy than practicing science. And now, lots of people have seen apples fall from a tree and haven't said gravity.
Exactly. So where did they come?
So there you have the inner life, the alchemical life that he was engaged in. They were experiments, but they were for a spiritual purpose. And he didn't accept a lot of the orthodoxy of the church, which got him into some trouble. But he could then apply it and get the higher inspiration. Some people limit themselves. They don't believe in that. So even if some information they were picking up information, they wouldn't think they were picking it up. And they wouldn't believe in their intuition. And so they block it off. And they aren't being themselves either. So there is that element too of releasing your inner potential, including your psychic powers, and that's where bravery can come in as well.
Yeah, no, you've given a great personal example, I think, with the, as Erasmus is advising you about going into trance.
Yeah, there was an inner fear. I mean, you think, oh gosh, trance. I mean, you suddenly think, will I ever come back again? Will I, all these silly fears that can come. Yeah, and also sometimes when you just with Kundalini, you start to raise it, well, will I ever get it back down again? Well, I said, these are silly fears. Some people have out-of-body experiences, actually. And in fact, millions of people have had out-of-body experience, according to opinion polls. There'll be people watching this show now, I'm sure, who've had an out-of-body experience. Let us know, please. Write into us and tell us. But they see themselves floating over their body. Sometimes then they panic and think, oh my God, where am I? I'll never get back. This one person I met was in a dentist's chair and suddenly was floating around the room under anesthetic, looking down, quite aware. But if you can go with it, though, that out-of-body experience, if you can, as it were, almost like relax into it, and if necessary, you can always say a prayer, and you will return. But if you can flow with it, it can be the most wonderful, wonderful experience you've ever experienced. It's an absolutely wonderful thing. It's an extremely difficult thing to do at will, really difficult thing to do at will.
Yeah.
But it can happen quite naturally. And it happens, as I say, to millions of people. But again, the fear can kick in. So this is also part of being yourself. It's actually not what people think of as being themselves,
Totally.
but awakening your inner powers.
I think, this is a good message, I think, in general, of overcoming whatever fear is preventing you from realizing what you really are, including that latent inner power that can allow you to become so much more than you even believe that you might be at this moment.
Yes.
And that there's various different things that we have to overcome. That could be that general fear as you describe. It could be the fear of being judged by other people. There could be the pressure that we feel to conform. But all of these things are just limitations, sometimes that we're just allowing to be imposed upon ourselves, so that we don't actually express who we truly are. And everyone is worse off in that case, I feel. Not only yourself for not being yourself, but whatever inspiration, whatever contribution that you could have made to the world as a whole is not being done.
Yeah. You might be the one-eyed man in the kingdom.
Exactly. You might be at the potential to be that person, might be that person, but if you're but if there's something still holding you back, or there's some other that you're not able to overcome, then everyone's poorer.
Yeah, and you can overcome it.
Yeah. Agreed. So I think we've got some powerful themes here. I mean, there's the realizing you're in a potential element. There's being able to live with integrity in terms of what you actually believe and stand by that. And then also overcoming this fear, whatever it is that might be holding you back, whether there's things that you feel internally or pressure that you feel from outside. And Erasmus, I think, is a great example of.
And let me just finish with attuning yourself to your higher self, which I started with.
Yeah.
There's a wonderful, I will give this wonderful, it's really an aphorism, but you can use it as an affirmation. From aphorism to affirmation. It's this: I am the divine presence which is creating perfection throughout my whole life.
That's a great.
I am the divine presence which is creating perfection throughout my whole life. That's taught by my master, your master, Dr. George King. Now that's a statement you can use. You can say it mentally. When you're in a situation, I've been in this, where you lose confidence. Matter of fact, when Dr. King I was first employed by the Aetherius Society at the age of, I think at the time I was 24 when I was employed, and then he came over. I was probably in about that age, 25 maybe. And I wasn't very confident of actually being with him, working with him, doing tasks for him, because he was like a powerhouse. I mean, a focused, concentrating. He was in his element in those days. So because he'd be in his 50s then, I suppose, and it was quite something to be around. But I used that affirmation a lot, and it really helped me. And if there's an issue within you about you don't feel you are what you're meant to be or what have you, link up to your higher self. And that's one affirmation you can use to help you to link up with it. And it will help to align you in the direction you are meant to go. And you'll know the direction you're meant to go.
That's perfect. Thank you, Richard.
For me, there's three big takeaways that I'd love to share from that show. The first one is to know yourself. Right? You got to know that you are a spark of God. In whatever degree you can know that now. And then to aspire to manifest that. To throw off these limitations that are imposed on us from outside, the expectations, the pressure to conform, the ordinary, mainstream dumbing down of life, and which is set as an expectation for us to fulfill. The second one is about living with integrity, like the example we saw or we heard of Erasmus there. Someone who, despite enormous pressure, stuck to his most deeply held values and beliefs. Consider your own most deeply held values and beliefs. Is there anything that's going to make you to compromise on those and sell out? And finally, perhaps most importantly, it's about attuning ourselves, connecting ourselves with our own higher self. It's about allowing ourselves to be led, to be inspired, to be influenced by our own higher self rather than our lower self as we go about our everyday life. So that instead we can begin to manifest what we are in essence, which is our true divine nature. Now, if you enjoyed that episode about really being who you are, then be sure to check out this video over here about finding your people on the spiritual path, or this one over here that goes deeper into unlocking your intuition so you can make a deeper connection with that still small voice within you. Thanks very much for tuning into the show, and see you next time.